Hi everyone, just before we get into this episode of Type 1 I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for pressing play. I really hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, don't forget to hit subscribe and you'll be notified when new episodes come about. You can find us across podcast land on Spotify, iTunes, all those good places as well. Secondly, anything you hear on this podcast should not be taken as medical advice. I am, of course, not a professional, and you do need to seek advice from your healthcare team before making any changes to your diabetes management. And lastly, if you want to say hello, I do have an Instagram page specifically for the Type 1 podcast. You can find it at Studio Type 1. That's at Studio Type 1, the number, on 1, the number. And you can also come and say hello and follow me on my personal page, which is at Miss Jen Grieves. And all of that will be noted in the episode description. Hi everyone, and welcome to Type 1, a podcast that delves into the obscure, complex and challenging world of life with Type 1 diabetes. I'm Jen Grieves, and each week, with the help of some brilliant guests, I'll be showing that there is no normal when it comes to handling this whopper of a chronic condition, because we're all pretty much figuring out the messiness of day-to-day life with diabetes as we go. And most of all, even though it doesn't always feel like it, we are absolutely not alone. My guest today is Veerle Huigen. Diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as an adult at the age of 23, the impact the condition had on her life prompted Veerle to start working in diabetes, initially at JDRF in the Netherlands. Veerle has become a powerhouse in the corporate world of diabetes, now spearheading huge changes in the future of diagnosis in her role as public affairs lead for autoimmune type 1 diabetes at Sanofi. Veerle is someone I've been lucky enough to work with at various points over the years, and I've watched in awe as she gets into the heart of diabetes companies, shaping them to ensure that they serve people living with the condition as best as possible, ultimately working towards better treatments and therefore better outcomes. Hello, my lovely.
I
Get
am
out of me.
I am tearing up you telling me this because that's incredible. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, I'm so happy. And nothing I said there isn't factual. That is facts. I am in awe at what you do, at how you do it, at how you kind of carry yourself in these big companies, and you're shaping things and changing things. And it comes from like such a personal place. But the impact it's having, as I've witnessed you kind of move through your career, it's just so impressive. But most of all, I'm just happy that I got through pronouncing your surname. I don't know if I did it justice, but here we are.
It's okay. I've heard worse, so let's leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much. But yes, how are you today? How's it going? I think the
I'm
answer
okay.
to that is busy. Yeah.
It's busy. It's busy. It's I think that goes for everybody in a corporate job, whether that's in diabetes or not. Corporate jobs are like most of the time doing 3 jobs at once, and the deadline is always yesterday. So it's busy.
And are you feeling that particularly as you kind of move up the ladder? It's something we'll get into in terms of handling it with your type 1 alongside everything
No,
you
I
have
think
to do.
no, I think it's a lot that it's just me, that's just how I am. It's just me. I take on all the things because I want to make this world better. So yeah, I take on all the things, and that is more my character than it is the position that I'm in. I felt like this a lot when I was at JDRF back then as well, and that was very small, not really moving up the ladder, corporate ladder, if you want to call it that. So that is, that's just my personality and my character just as much as also the pressure of the job. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we need people like you in the world, because without that momentum and that impetus, I've seen you're driving change, and I know you're involved in some incredible projects at the moment that are literally changing the future. And that is just very exciting to witness and to even have a touch point with. And I can imagine someone working in this role who lives with the condition is kind of even more poignant, even more meaningful for you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And it is. And it's, so I've been working for about, over 10 years. I finished studying in 2013, started working in 2014. And I spent basically all of my career in type 1 diabetes, and seeing the impact that you can make, it's with this thing that none of us wanted. That's a good way of using it. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it also gets, and I think that's one of the things that I still feel is the most special about being in this space, in this community. It's none of us wanted to be a part of this community. None of us wanted to be part of this group. You don't wish it on anybody. But if you get there, have you met the people? Like, there's so many incredible people in this world. And that's and I get to meet a lot of them through the jobs that I'm doing. So that's one of my favorite parts on working in all of this. Yeah.
Amazing. I love to hear that. And because I've heard and I've spoken to a fair few kind of diabetes nurses that were maybe prompted to go into healthcare and help others in that way by their diagnosis or by being the parent of someone living with type 1. But I haven't specifically spoken to someone who's chosen the corporate path as a badass independent woman, can I say? And so I'm really excited to get into this and the interplay of kind of the purpose that you're so motivated by, but then kind of what can be quite tricky to juggle in terms of your own health needs. So just to kind of paint a picture for everyone before we get into your diagnosis and things, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the amount of travel you've had over the past while. And I know it's been a particularly busy period. So and I know you love it and I love the travel too, but just to sort of paint a picture in terms of people listening will understand what that means when we say traveling with type 1 diabetes. It comes with a few other things to think about, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I was counting for my mom, and I still have 2 trips to go. One is actually a holiday, but that's but at the end of the year, I will have had 18 trips. So that's, if I take, that's 17 from 1st of January until now. And that varies from 1-day trips to a different country to give a presentation or to do meetings, up until a full week at international congresses and pre-meetings and post-meetings and that sort of thing. Yeah. So basically, I counted that the longest I've been home this year, back to back, is 6 weeks.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot by anyone's standards.
Yeah.
And are you feeling the effects of that in relation to your type 1?
Yeah.
And you've also moved house, I should say. Like it's
Yeah.
been a year. So
It's been a year. Yeah. And I actually also think so. I was diagnosed at 23, and in the beginning we said it was probably a LADA, so slower onset. And I think I might have still had some of my own insulin production basically up until January, because then everything crashed. So that was great, because that's when I started a new job and moved. And then I think my the tiniest bit of insulin production that I still had died. So that was great timing. Luckily, most of my travel doesn't cross time zones, so that's a big challenge that I normally feel that I don't have now. But yeah, it's very long days, not enough exercise, and not enough healthy food, and we all know how that affects glucose levels.
Yeah.
So that's been some weeks and days are better than others. But what is amazing to see, at least for me in the space that I'm in within type 1 diabetes, is at some points when it's specific events set up around type 1, I've been telling people, so if we do like finger foods and snacks as dinner, you're making my life incredibly much more hard. So can we do a sit down dinner, please? And then people are like, oh, wait, we hadn't thought about that. Yes, we can do a sit down dinner. And that's a very nice thing to realize in this space. And it doesn't always work, but especially in events with the company, yeah, they've been listening to that. And that's fantastic.
Amazing. And has that made you more forthright in terms of asking to have your needs met? I don't know if you're someone that always felt quite comfortable in doing that, but especially as you were getting to grips with type 1, and we will come to your diagnosis imminently.
At some
There's just
point.
so much I want to talk about. Has being able to do that in a safe space, in an environment where you know people understand type 1 diabetes because you work for JDRF or a company that is producing insulin pumps, etc., has that enabled you to kind of find your own rhythm in terms of being able to extend that beyond a place where people understand what type 1 is?
It's a bit mixed. So in my previous company, so the insulin pump company and JDRF, which is now Breakthrough T1D, of course, that was easier because it's smaller companies. I mean, JDRF in the Netherlands was a group of 4 people when I worked there. So it's very easy to say,
Wow.
well, when we're going out for a team lunch or a team dinner, yeah, we'll make sure that there's something that we can eat. And everyone understood very well. The same at the insulin pump company that I worked for, there was a high level of understanding of type 1 that was in the whole onboarding process. We went through all the stigma and all the judgment and all the, we can't eat sugar and we can't eat cake and please just give us a birthday cake when it's there and that sort of thing. Sanofi was actually quite different because it's huge, right? So there's people working on diabetes, but there's also people working on cardiovascular illnesses, and there's people working on asthma and neurology, and it's less obvious. And then even if you go into the diabetes space, there's people for who this is a job, and that's great, and that's fine. And that's, for a lot of people, their job is a job and they make money and they bring that home so they can feed their kids and pay for their housing and that. Great, fantastic. But those are not the people that are going to be like really deep diving into this disease and all that it means. And then there's the people who do. And that's the people who, when I tell them, that there's this great podcaster who talks in English about all things type 1 diabetes. And she's actually talked to a Dutch medical psychologist who we know and love. Maybe you should listen to that. There's also people who do. And there's people who are like, yeah, but this is just my job. I'm not going to spend my free time listening to a podcast on diabetes. I have enough diabetes in my work. So it's very mixed. But people try. And we've also had, like in April, we had a big presentation talking to, so I work for the Benelux and the Nordics, so that's 8 countries. And we had a big hybrid webinar. So we were on stage in Amsterdam together with a good friend of mine who also lives with type 1. And we also had a broadcast to the rest of the company in all of our 8 countries. And it was around lunchtime. And everyone was invited to have lunch first and then come join the meeting. And we were like, yeah, no, we're not going to have lunch because then we don't know what's going to happen during this big presentation for all these people. And when we mentioned that to one of the people facilitating and arranging for the meals and everything, she was like, no, we'll get you proper food afterwards. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you need. Does it need sugar? Does it need carbs? What would you prefer? And it was just completely facilitated. And that's like, people like that. What else do you need?
Yes. The sweet relief when you go through life trying to not be an imposition, but equally meet your health needs and the needs that your body has as someone living with this or anything else. We're just talking about such, one condition, one medical condition.
Yeah.
I think when your needs are met in a way that doesn't make you feel like an imposition, it is almost hard to articulate, isn't it? Because we carry this and we know we have to explain ourselves and we know we have to reintroduce it again and again and again. And I think when you are met with someone who just makes it a little bit easier, it's actually quite indescribable. But I think sometimes it takes asking, and that I wonder if that's something that comes naturally to you in terms of being such an independent woman. Yeah. Okay.
I don't ask. I don't ask for help. What were you asking for help? Wait, what? It's just that if somebody asks me actively, is there anything we should consider for your diabetes? Then I fall in love with that person right away, because thank you for asking, because I wouldn't have offered. Um, and I now have given the examples of all of the times when it goes great, right? But if we go to a congress in Spain, and you know this, dinner is late, which means
Mm.
that if you, because I'm on a closed loop system just as much as you are, so that makes things a little easier. But a colleague of mine, he's on pens. So if he eats at 9 p.m. and we're at a congress, so we need to be up next day 7, maybe you want to go to the gym, because this whole thing is, the gyms help, workouts help. So if we eat at 9 and we're done at 11, and you're on a pen, and it's fatty foods and it's all the things that you know you're gonna spend the next 2 hours after your dinner still trying to fix, then Spain is not great. And you can't move that. That's also what traveling in a job with type 1 diabetes also entails. So sometimes it's fantastic, and sometimes you know that, if you're going to be in Spain for a week, it's going to be harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the corporate world in general. When you're entertaining clients, you have client dinners, or you go off on an event that's on site. If you work in events, it doesn't need to be specifically country based, but if you have a job that requires this of you, sort of navigating that outside of your normal routine, you're not eating the same food as normal, your exercise routine's thrown off, like you say, but actually that's the very thing that's helping you keep things steady, and for your mental health as well. Your sleep's affected, but you have to be on more the next day than you ever normally do, because this is the big event that you've been working towards. I think you've just fantastically demonstrated there, like how much people working in any kind of profession are handling when it comes to this thing. And there's so much in that, and there's certainly a lot that I've personally experienced. And I don't particularly work in a super corporate world. I think even going on a different location within the same country sort of throws you off, doesn't it? Because you normally have an early start, a late finish, your meal times are different, exactly as you said, and you're trying to be professional, engaging, get your point across, put a business case forward, like all these things. And when you break it down, it's like, oh yeah, we're doing quite a lot of stuff here. Yeah. So with that, let's take it back, because otherwise I will just keep going forward, because there's so many things that are popping up in my head. So let's talk about your diagnosis, but also where you were at in your life, in your professional life, and what was going on at the time in terms of what diabetes came along and kind of impacted. But I know that your journey to diagnosis wasn't super simple, was it?
No. So I was finishing my master's. I was writing my master's thesis on a fantastic topic that people are still laughing about when I talk about it now, because I wrote my thesis on a gay dating app before there were dating apps as we know them now. And because that was like one of the first dating apps, and I studied communications and social media and corporate communications as well. So that was like the whole development of social media, but especially apps and dating apps was hilarious. So I was working on my thesis.
You're a visionary, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm not sure, because during my defense, they asked me, do you think this kind of app would work for heterosexual couples? And I was like, no, because women won't put themselves out there. Which of course we realized pretty quickly that we do that just as much. And we're willing to do all of that to find love.
We're out here, we're doing it.
We're trying.
That's the other podcast.
Exactly. No, so that I was working on that. I wasn't feeling too well, and I had a throat infection. And after the throat infection, I kind of still felt pretty tired. And back then I was living in a house where our bathroom was downstairs. And I lived with a roommate, and I realized that I was getting out of my bed about 6 times a night, going down the stairs to the bathroom. And if you need to walk up and down the stairs, that you realize pretty quickly, wait, how many times have I walked these stairs this night? And they start Googling, because that's the generation that we are. You start Googling our symptoms, and you go into anything from schizophrenia, vitamin B12 deficiency, 3 types of cancer, and diabetes. And then I felt like diabetes was something I could easily get tested for. You know, you go to a pharmacy and they put that little needle and little blood on a piece of paper into the machine, and you hear that you don't have diabetes. That was kind of my assumption. That's where I would go. And I went to the pharmacy, got the test. The little machine said high. And the lady at the pharmacy said, well, it's probably broken. It's a bit old. Maybe you should go to a GP and have it tested there. I didn't know what the HI meant. I was like, hi.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. Nice to see you too. And then I went to the GP, and the lady behind the reception was like, yeah, no, it's probably an old machine. It will, this will be better. And it said hi too. And I was like, what does that mean? And then they rushed you through the emergency room. And I weighed about 120 kilos back then. And I'm not that tall. I am 1 meter, 65, 67 centimeters. So I was what they classify as morbidly obese. So if you then have blood sugar levels that say high, 32, 33, you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Even at 23, doesn't matter. And they said, we'll test your blood for autoantibodies, but we're assuming it's type 2 diabetes. And they gave me insulin to get my blood sugar down, and then they put me on metformin. And the day after, they sent me home without that much guidance. And they said, we'll transfer your information to your GP. Who was in a different city, because I was in the hospital in my parents' hometown, and I lived somewhere else by then. But I got the medication, and I started Googling, and I started looking things up, and I was like, okay, I'm 23. I'm going to fix this. Because if you're, and I think this will resonate with a lot of people who've been overweight at some point in their life or still are, especially those who got diagnosed with type 2 at some stage. People have been telling you probably for years, especially healthcare professionals, that if you keep going like this, you'll get diabetes. And they've told me that from basically when I was 13. So there's a lot of blame there, because they told you it was coming and you should have done better. So there's a lot of guilt and self-blame. But as the person that I am, I was like, no, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to cure my type 2 diabetes. I'm going to walk, and I'm going to eat healthy, and I'm going to exercise, and I'm going to fix this. And after about 7 months, I went to my GP for something unrelated. And I said, so shouldn't I be having checkups with you guys on my diabetes? And they were like, you have diabetes? Yeah. Okay. So no, we'll ask the hospital to send us your data, and then we'll set up a meeting with you in the Netherlands with type 2. You're being treated at the GP's office with kind of like a GP assistant. So I set up a meeting with her, went there a week after, and she told me, yeah, you're not supposed to be here because we don't treat type 1. And I'm like, no, you got it wrong. I know I'm young, but this is type 2. No, we got the tests, and it's autoantibodies, and it's type 1 diabetes. And glucose-wise, I wasn't even doing that bad. So then it was like, okay, so it's probably a LADA. They started me on long-acting insulin. And then I think about 7 months later, added short-acting insulin because I ate very low carb, and I was losing weight, and I was still losing weight eating low carb. I need to turn a light on. Give me a second.
Yeah, I think I'll do the same. We're both losing the light here.
It's becoming very dark all of a sudden.
You're slowly disappearing.
Before we're completely in the dark.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be great. Where was I? Yeah. So eventually I started on insulin, long-acting first, then they added short-acting.
And just so I'm clear, was it that they'd got your test results back and not contacted you? Or this kind of all happened in a snowball?
No, they had all the information stayed at the hospital and wasn't sent to my GP. Also wasn't shared with me. So I could have known about a month after I was diagnosed that it was type 1. But that took about 7 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite frightening, isn't it?
Yeah, because with the type 2 diagnosis, um, I was fully convinced that I was going to fix this. And by now, I know that type 2 is just as much as a progressive disease as a lot of other progressive diseases, and that even though it could have gone into remission, it could have still come back, and it would have still taken a lot of work and management to do this, and to live without insulin or any kind of medication, basically. But when you're 23, you're fully convinced that, this is something that you can do. And then getting a diagnosis that is, and I'm going to say this and then I'm going to correct myself, completely not your fault. And type 2 is also not your fault, but that's for me what I still believed back then. But getting a diagnosis that is so far off from your control, and also that this is going to be here forever. And that last part is still something that I actually quite struggle with a bit. If I talk to somebody who's had type 1 diabetes for 30 years, the only thing I can think is, I hope I never get there. I hope by then there's something better, because the idea of having to do this now for another 19, oh, I applaud everyone who's been doing this for 6 months. I applaud everyone who's been doing this for a month. But those who've been doing it for so many years, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're really immersed in it as well. So I imagine you have to have quite a lot of those conversations. What's that like?
It's a bit mixed. So I think in this space, and we've done that just as much as the industry around us has done that, is that we've been focusing a lot on all of those who are doing incredible things, like Nick Jonas, who's this singer, and all these professional athletes with type 1 diabetes, and politicians, and all of those people who do very big things. And look at us, look at what we all can do. And I've been that person saying, I can do anything with type 1 diabetes. I'll go travel for 6 months, and I'll take a big job, and I'll do all the things, and I'll go skydiving, and I'll learn how to dive and do all the things. That has emphasized, I think, a lot that you're fine. And over the past, and that might be my experience working in this space, but also the fact that I've had diabetes now for 11 years, that it hits a little harder sometimes. I feel that we've been talking more and more about the hard parts. And while that for me is very freeing, because you kind of take away that it's just all, no, we're fine. At the same time, sometimes you just don't want to talk about diabetes. And that's hard when you are also working in this space. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And how much of that feeling like you are maybe turning the tide on this message that we can do everything and we can do anything? I can't remember which guest it was. Oh, Beth Edwards, who is a diabetes nutritionist living with type 1.
Yeah.
She said, we can do anything, but we can't do it all at once. And that really spoke to me, because I just thought, yeah, I can, run 15 kilometers today, but I might not be able to put my foot on the floor out of bed tomorrow. And not because it's been caused by the running. It's just how these days go when you live with a very dynamic chronic illness. Yeah. And I used to be exactly the same as you. I don't think it even occurred to me that there was something I couldn't do, but I wonder if that was because I was less in tune with my body than I am now. But I wonder where you're at in relation to that, in terms of how much acceptance you've come to, in the sense that maybe you have less to prove to yourself or others around type 1. Like, how does that sort of sit with you?
I think that it's still there. Also, just as much my character as wanting to prove myself in general on everything. Like, I can do it.
Right.
I'm not sure that would have been better if I hadn't had type 1 diabetes. I have been, and I realized that especially in the company that I'm in now, if there's a safe space in a company to talk about this and say, guys, today diabetes is kicking my butt. I'm logging off. I'm out. I can't do diabetes anymore, and diabetes is everything. So I need to take a day. I need to take half a day. I need to take a couple of hours. I need to go to the beach. I need to walk in the wind and let it all blow out of my head. Now that I am in a space where it feels completely safe to do so, it has been very helpful, because sometimes you just want to complain about how bad it is, and you just want to just feel that this thing that we're doing all the time. And in the very first beginning, when you started making your podcast, your intro was something along the lines of this whopper of a chronic condition.
Yeah, I think it still is.
I remember that. And
I skipped through it. Don't worry, everyone else. I skipped through it too.
But that's, for me, that's still like, and sometimes you just want to be like, no, today's hard. And having that safe space to do that in your work environment, it's huge. And that also allows me to sometimes take up that space and say, no, today it's not happening. It's not a good day.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I don't think for a long time I understood what my rights were in relation to diabetes and the workplace. And I just think it's a point I want to take a beat just to articulate for people that there are some laws that protect us. Obviously, it varies from country to country, but if you are needing help, or you need a bit more support, or you want to have your hypo suites on the factory floor and no food is allowed on the factory floor, whatever it is, whatever your work looks like, there are things that you can dig into, because we are allowed to say we're not the same as everyone else, and actually we have needs. And I think I was quite defiant about that, and I didn't feel like I needed that help maybe, but I was doing myself a disservice. And it's something I've sort of, maybe it's just getting older, and again, acceptance and living with this a long time. But I think as well, what I'm hearing and what you're saying, and I don't know if I'm projecting, but this sort of slow and steady picking away at us and our health, and the kind of constant low level day to day of the thing. When you said the idea of living with it for 30 years makes you feel exhausted, and you're already exhausted, I wonder if it's that, because, when you look at someone with type 1, it's like, oh yeah, you can do everything. And then you sort of get a bit down the line, and like you say, this isn't going away. I wonder if it's something in that, isn't it? This like slow burn of it.
Yeah.
How does that kind of resonate with you?
Yeah. And that does resonate with me a lot. And I think there's also ups and downs. Like there's weeks and months and years when it's less. And then there's weeks and months and days and whatever when it's more. So that also, I think, comes and goes. I think about 2 years back, there was a well-known person with diabetes from the community who had type 1 for, I think, 40 years or 35. And she's a member of one of the diabetes associations in the Netherlands. And one of her other members suggested that we'd all send her a postcard for her 35th anniversary, and that when she'd opened the door, it would be full of a pile of cards. And I remember writing that card and writing down, I can't even imagine 35 years. I am incredibly proud of you, but I hope I never get there. And that was the first time, I think, that I was fully like, oh, look how big this thing is. And that went away again, and you go back to your life and all of that. But you do realize that, once you've had, maybe that's just me or that's us, but once you've had a thought like that, it's a slow burn. And then sometimes it feels harder than other times. But yeah, I think the realization of how big this is hits us at times.
This episode of Type 1 is sponsored by Dexcom. I've been using the Dexcom continuous glucose monitor for years, and it's hard for me to express just how much of a difference it's made to my life as someone living with type 1 diabetes. Their CGM sensors give me the confidence to make informed treatment decisions in the moment, which is great for me as I'm often running around, and with just a quick glance I can see exactly where my glucose level is, where it's been, and where it's headed. So please take a look at Dexcom.com. They have a choice of systems, so you can find the right one for your lifestyle. And going back to that time of diagnosis when you were told it was type 1, I can imagine there was a lot of research happening, but do you remember kind of 23 is a very pivotal age? As you said, you were finishing your studies and about to embark on this world of work.
Yeah.
Do you remember the thoughts that you had around maybe what it meant for your life or what it meant for your career or anything like that? And where did kind of going down the path of working in the diabetes
I don't
world
think I had
come
a
in?
clue of the impact of type 1 in the beginning. I don't think anyone has. I think in general, especially when you're diagnosed as an adult, there is, especially as a young adult, and it's gotten better now in the Netherlands, but especially in the beginning, there is such a lack of proper support in adult diagnoses. And in my work, I've also recently come across some data that suggested that, people who are diagnosed as adults feel way less supported by HCPs than people who are diagnosed in families who have a kid that's diagnosed as a child. So our systems are way better set up for children's diagnosis than adult diagnosis. So for me, that I don't think I had a clue in the beginning. I have always wanted to work in healthcare. I wanted to become a doctor when I was still in school. I'm not too great at all the science subjects, so that didn't go very far. But it was always my goal to do something potentially related to healthcare, or at least where I could, and this sounds weird, serve, right? Help people in one way or another. And because of my obesity and all of that, I imagine myself for a long time working in that space around young adults and adolescents with obesity. And then when I got diagnosed with diabetes, that was kind of like the switch. Like, okay, no, this is what I'm gonna try. And back then, it was a very bad job market in the Netherlands, so I sent an open application to JDRF. Had a first conversation, had a second conversation, got the offer, and that's how it began. And I never really saw myself in the philanthropy space, working for a charity. But it was the diabetes part that has kept me going. That's also what moved me to medical technology, and that's also what moved me now to the pharmaceutical industry. It's the diabetes part. It's not pharma, it's not medtech, it's not charities, it's not philanthropy, it's diabetes.
And to be so early on in your kind of diabetes journey and to go down that path, I think is incredibly kind of honorable and should be applauded. As I said, we need people like you driving change and being in the beating heart of these companies, especially the big ones, as you illustrated, that aren't necessarily solely working in diabetes. Yeah. But it strikes me that working in diabetes, and particularly when you started at JDRF, you're still getting to grips with the condition, as you've just articulated, kind of alone.
Yeah.
What was that like? Did working in JDRF with admittedly a small number, but other people in the space help you get to grips with it? What needed to happen?
Yeah. It gave me, first of all, it gave me like incredible amounts of information, like education on all these topics that I hadn't really been properly educated on. I was a lotta, so my beginning with diabetes wasn't, it was soft. It was softish, right? I was slowly starting on Lantus, not having to inject if I ate an apple, and all of that came very slowly. So I got to see a lot of that around me working at JDRF before I got there myself. So that was actually incredibly helpful for me to basically, while my diabetes was still kind of developing, progressing, to be in this space and basically learn from all levels. So for me, that was actually very helpful, but also scary, because at JDRF, I mean, JDRF is a charity that funds research into type 1 diabetes. So you hear the bad parts, right? You hear the stories about the 16-year-old that after one too many beers didn't wake up in the morning. And you hear the stories about a 1.5-year-old being diagnosed. And how do you get a 1.5-year-old to eat sugar when they're low, or wake up? You talk to people who have to wake up their little baby in the middle of the night to eat sugar, and it's you also hear all the bad stuff. But it's, for me, it's always been super motivating, to because I just don't want people to go through this. I just want people to have a better chance, a better life, whatever that looks like. And especially my brother now has 2 kids. There's a third on the way. Whatever I can do, even if it's small bits and pieces, that if they, or my friends' kids, or my future own kids, if it happens, if they get type 1 diabetes, that it's just a little easier than what I had, what I have, and what we have, and what the people around us have. Yeah, worth it.
Yeah.
Absolutely worth it.
Yeah. It's you make me reflect, and I thank you for this. This is why I'm about to say this, because sometimes I feel so inefficient and inconsequential in what we do in the world, and I feel like I always say if this podcast reaches one person, that's enough. But you're sort of making me reflect at how that ripples, and that one person becomes 2 people, becomes 3 people and their cousin, and 4 people and their grandma and their classmates. And I'm not articulating this at all, but I just think it's incredibly potent and powerful to hear you speak about how you can affect change, and to know that of yourself, to know what is possible, what you can do. I just really applaud you in that, because
Oh,
I
but
don't know if it's
that's not just me. I think we all have the potential to do that. I think you, with your podcast, I mean, when it was just a couple of years in, and I remember this very vividly. No, I think at the very first beginning, when I started Googling, when I just got diagnosed, I ended up on Renza's blog. And that helped me incredibly. And I started following Carrie Sparling on Instagram, and that helped me incredibly. And then there's podcasts like yours, and it's all those bits and pieces that I think make you feel like you're not alone. And there's a level of understanding that we have of each other. And nobody gets that. And that is, especially for those, I mean, I work in this space and I volunteered in this space, and I know so many people with type 1 diabetes. But for those who don't, that one podcast or that one blog post or that one Instagram post, it's exactly what you need to kind of realize, yes, you're not alone, and yes, things will get better, and it can help you through the hard days. And I think we all have the potential to be that, to make that change, even if it's just for one person at one time. And that goes as far as a simple conversation, all the way to trying to change the world at a big corporate pharmaceutical company.
which you are very much doing. You're incredibly passionate about language and stigma around diabetes. Hearing your diagnosis story and the judgment you faced from others, and also the sort of shame that you put on yourself, you said you had a stigma around aspects of type 2. Has that kind of driven the momentum that you feel now? Like, how did that impact the way you operate now, and the way you sort of put this at the forefront of the agenda a lot of the time?
It has, so
Rightly so, may I
yeah,
say.
so as a child, I wanted to be a writer because language has always been really powerful to me. Like reading books as a kid, it took me to
Yeah.
another world, and it still does. Even as an adult, there's fantasy books and they take me to another world, and I'm super happy there, and let me be there forever, kind of thing. So language for me is very powerful. The right language, especially in healthcare, um, can make an incredible difference. And I've realized that in hindsight about the type 2 and being obese as a young adolescent, as a young adult, that if the language from my doctors would have been different, I would have probably been different. I would have acted differently on the obesity part. Because when I went as a 16-year-old on a camp for obese kids, the language was different and the appreciation was different. And the fact that, obesity is not a choice, all of that sort of thing, all that goes against the stigma and the preconceived notions that people have, made me feel so much more powerful, living with that, and dealing with that. Because it kind of gave me the power that, yes, this is not something I chose, but doesn't mean that because I didn't choose it, I can't do something about it. And that took years to actually do something about it, but it went up and down. And the language that was used at that was completely different than what I'd heard for years. And then when I joined this amazing type 1 diabetes world, I entered that through JDRF, and JDRF has always been very particular about language. So that for me made a whole lot of difference on how I entered this and how I've always been pretty aware of language use in diabetes care. And it has shaped how I've followed up with my career as well, because I've, since the beginning, when I realized that I wanted to stay and work in this space, there were companies where I'm like, yeah, no, I'm never going to work for you, because the way you talk about people with diabetes, that's just, nah, I can't find myself in any of that. And of course, you don't always have a choice. And you know that, especially in a company as big as the one I'm at now, there can be 10 people who do it right, according to me, and then there will be 17,000 people who don't. So that's also something that you learn to live with. But if I can even make 1, 5, 10 more people working in this space talk about people with diabetes instead of diabetics and patients, I've won. And one of the people, and he's moved away from I work for North Europe, and one of the former medical managers, he completely changed his language about when I was about 9 months in, I think. And now he moved to a role in the US, and he still carries that. And when he's speaking on stage, internally or externally, he still talks about people with diabetes. He doesn't talk about patients. And then I feel like I've done my job. I'm done. If somebody like that takes it on that way, how my current manager, but also the team around me, has become so aware of their language use, that even when you hear them struggle, when you hear them like, oh, no, this is normally I'd say patient, but I don't do that anymore. That's incredible. And then I'm so proud of me, but also of them, that they've chosen to stand with us on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot in that, because we see this in all sort of discrimination when it comes to inclusivity and how language evolves over time. And just because it's something you've always said doesn't mean you can continue saying it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Again, it goes back to that ripple effect. That man is on stages telling now hundreds of thousands, if not thousands of people, person with diabetes. And yeah, that's absolutely incredible. I'm wondering how you feel about this, in particular, the language piece, in the sense of people with diabetes feeling quite differently from person to person.
Yeah.
Where do you sit with that? And how do you begin to kind of navigate that when you're trying to set standards and educate people?
And I think the biggest part for me there is that it's not up to me to decide if you want to be called a diabetic or a patient or whatever. And that's a continuous discussion that we have, I think, as well. But if you call yourself a diabetic to the world, then the world thinks it's okay to call me a diabetic. And that's what I'm not comfortable with. And I think that's the continuous balance And that's also why I'm super happy that like the big medical organizations like ESD and ISPAD and ADA and all the big medical congresses, but also the NHS in the UK and so many other countries now have guidelines and consensus statements on diabetes, because um, even if you call yourself a diabetic or I call myself a patient, there's guidelines that say you're safer, you're better off if you just call everyone person with diabetes, because nobody's going to be offended if you call them a person with diabetes. Um, and the last thing you want to do is, especially in healthcare, I think, is want to offend people calling them diabetics and patients, if that's a term that they feel is offensive or that doesn't fit them, because it makes it seems like that's all we are, patients and diabetics, and we're not. Yeah.
This has given me chills. Yeah, I think that's really interesting in the sense of like, we're all entitled to feel how we feel. We're all entitled to call ourselves what we want to call ourselves. But when we hear it on a grander, wider, bigger scale or professional setting, when it then comes to someone who feels differently than you do, that person might end up being disempowered, felt like they're being judged. And, that does lead to disengagement. We know that, like, the studies are there that show that this can, to the point, prevent people going to their appointments and things like that, so it's a bigger playing field, I think, than sometimes even I can comprehend. You know what I mean? I also want to touch a bit on kind of people's perceptions of these different industries, and I know it differs around the world and it's a very sensitive topic, but you're, as I mentioned, in the beating heart of, and you've got a broad range of experience now, from diabetes charities to tech companies to pharmaceuticals. What's your take on what it changed these people are trying to affect in kind of your general experience and things that you're working on that are for good? I just want to get your thoughts as someone who's from within, I guess, these kinds of companies.
Yeah, and I think that's always the topic of discussion. There's always going to be people who are going to tell me, and those who work with type 1 or any kind of condition in a space, they're making money of the fact that you're sick. Because that's I mean, it's valid, right? But there's also going to be people who make money of the fact that I like wine. And there's also going to be people who make money of the fact when I break my foot. And there's going to be people who make money of the fact that I need to want to fly to Australia for a vacation. So there's validity to that. And at the same time, like, if somebody's going to make money off of me, might as well be me. And at the same time, if I am here where I am, I can make an impact with the right people and the right teams and the right companies. Me having type 1 diabetes can make this company do better for all of us, because they're going to make money regardless. But if I'm here and I can push some buttons somewhere with some people and have the big people post on LinkedIn about people with diabetes instead of patients, or decide that, the way that we're approaching a certain product or a certain disease area changes, because I've told them, this is not going to work. This is not going to sit well with the community. This is not how diabetes works. All of those bits and pieces. Yeah, not worth it. I'm then okay if people tell me, oh, they're making money, or they're making money out of the fact that you're sick. There's always going to be somebody making money out of the fact that I'm sick or healthy or like wine. And if I can then make that a little better for all of us, for some of us, happy to be a part of that.
And I would echo that in the work that I've done more on the advocacy side. I've always been quite humbled by how much these companies are willing to listen, and the changes that I've seen implemented just as a kind of bystander, and I've always been, it took a minute to knock the doors down a little bit, and because it was new, this world of kind of the democratizing of healthcare, shall we say, that came about from social media. But the changes we've seen have been, as far as I can see, on the whole, and I don't mean to undermine like some basic parity that we absolutely need in terms of access and things like that, and affordable access
Absolutely.
to medicines. But the companies I've interacted with, they listen. And to your point about they're making money from you being sick, plenty of companies are making money from me being healthy and making me feel like I'm sick, telling me I'm sick when I'm not, or I need to be thinner, or I need this, or I need that, which I don't need. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think it's an interesting point, and people are going to feel how they feel, but
that's also fine, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, just as much as I'm to mine, that I'd rather contribute with the little bits that I'm doing than not.
Yeah, I hear you. And so we've been talking about the travel and the kind of lifestyle that being a career woman or a career person in any industry entails from a practical level as someone living with type 1 diabetes. How do you handle it? How have you come to handle it? And what tricks, I guess, have you picked up along the way?
Yeah. Keep working out. One of my colleagues was laughing when I needed to book a hotel. I was looking at hotels and he was like, "Why are you looking for a hotel with a gym?" I'm like, "I'm looking for a hotel with a gym because I need to keep my workouts keep me mentally sane, but also they're helpful with my diabetes, right?" That has been a huge help for me. Also, finding grocery stores, getting cheese and vegetables, because that is what helps me. And I've also learned that, especially during long days, long hours, long congresses, long meetings, it's okay if it's a little out of whack. It's okay if my diabetes is a little worse. But at the same time, it's also okay if I'm in a meeting and my blood sugar doesn't go down and I am not of huge importance to go outside and take a walk. Because that's also a part of it. And back in February, we had a meeting and we were with a group of people, all very important people, in a workshop on type 1 diabetes. And I just switched back to pens for a little bit because my diabetes felt like it had gone out of control. And then if you use technology, you're not sure if it's a technology or if it's you or if it's the insulin. Or so going back on pens removed some variables. So I went back on pens, and I was still trying to figure out what my long-acting insulin, how many units I should take. And I have been up like full night, hypo after hypo after hypo. All my dextrose was gone. All my hypo treats were gone. And I hadn't slept more than half an hour at the time because there would be another alarm and another alarm and another alarm.
Mm-hmm.
All just like 3.5, between 3.5 and 4, like the whole time.
That's the worst, when it dips and it beeps and then it goes into range and then it beeps and then it goes out of range again and it beeps again. You're like,
just
give me a break.
Beeping. All night
Yeah.
beeping. And then the next day you go into a meeting and like your opinion is valuable and you know that like you're all in a different country, all brought together to add value, to do something valuable for a company. And I think we were right after lunch and I'm like, "Sorry guys, I need to go to the hotel and I need to go sleep because this shit has also happened." That's also life with type 1 diabetes, right? We're standing here and we're doing this job and we're here to support all of this, but sometimes you need to prioritize your health. And I think that's also a huge compliment to the space that I'm in and the people that I work with, that I feel the safety and security to do that. So shout out to everyone at Sanofi who's given me this sense of safety and security, to be comfortable with that. And to be honest, in this company, but also in most of my previous companies, I've always felt that sense of safety I haven't always taken it, but I've always felt that it was okay. So yeah, and that's just, and then being able, but for yourself, being able to say, I need to take a break, especially when traveling that much, is huge. And that's something that I've learned to get comfortable with, to say, if I do this other, if I do another trip, or if I go to this meeting, then I need to go to the gym after, and I can't do that. Or if I go to this dinner, then I won't be there tomorrow morning at this session, or whatever happens. So yeah, that's also something that you need to learn, especially when it's a big busy job.
Yeah, because I think I said it at the beginning, but I sort of realized I was doing myself a disservice by just keeping
Yeah.
on, keeping on. And I was undermining the gravity of the condition. And it doesn't mean I'm failing. Actually, I think there was a point where I realized I was empowering myself because, again, as you said at the beginning, you're like, I don't ask for help. But actually, it's this condition. This condition, on one hand, makes us so independent. And, well, in my experience, and I'm speaking to someone who I know feels the same, has made me so like, this is my thing. I have to carry it all.
Yeah.
It's fine. I've got it. I'm handling it. But it's the very thing that is requiring us to be, it causes us to be vulnerable. It means that we have extra needs. It does mean we can't keep going, and we do have to slow down. And I think the modern way of working, actually, on one hand, again, it's just a world full of contradictions. We're connected more than ever before. We're on all the time. But actually, in a lot of professions, especially since the pandemic, we've got a bit more flexibility in how we work. And for me, I found that to be quite helpful. Pros and cons to absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's amazing to hear that you feel safe and secure in your place of work. And I think we all deserve that, no matter what you're dealing with and what you're handling. Yeah. I think also it's worth touching on the few things that you mentioned there. The things that save our life are food and drink. So they're consumed by everyone, they're available everywhere, and they're not seen by people outside of our space as life-saving, medicinal. And the other thing you mentioned was the gym, that I think many people can view as kind of luxurious or superfluous to what is necessary. I just think that is such a hard line to walk, trying to advocate for yourself with these things that don't look like medicine, but actually in terms of quality of life,
Yeah.
being able to have any chance of getting a grip on my blood sugars, like they are life-saving, and we need sort of separate branded
Yeah.
things, don't we? But I think just to validate anyone who feels like it's really hard to advocate for themselves, ask for help. I think the whole world when it comes to diabetes is incredibly contradictory. It's, I can do anything. Oh, but wait, you have to save your own life 3 times a day sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
oh, it's just a lot, isn't it? It's a lot.
Yeah.
What's the goal for you in this world? What do you want to look back at and be able to say in maybe 20, 30, 40 years time, apart from I hope I never get there, in the sense of
That
there being a cure or something that has made our lives infinitely easier to handle this condition?
I want nobody to ever be called a diabetic again, unless they call them that themselves. That if there's anything I can feel like I've contributed to, it's better language use in diabetes. It's us not feeling like we failed if there's a low glucose level or a high glucose level. And I say high or low because bad means that I've done something wrong. Um, so if we can, and yes, a cure, please, but if we can all feel just a little bit more um, empowered, just because other people around us make the right choices when it comes to wording, when it comes to language, I think that can make huge differences. And another thing that if because that's an outside part, right? That's a part that the external world can do for us is choosing the right words. Something that I think we can do for ourselves, and that I hope that everyone with type 1 diabetes realizes as soon as they get diagnosed, is it's not your fault. Not the diagnosis, but also not the highs and the lows and the struggle and the hard parts. None of it's your fault. We all do the best we can. And some days that means that I go to the gym and that I eat low carb and that I bolus 30 minutes before my meals. And some days that means that I'm just gonna, it's none of that. It's bolusing after I've eaten because I forgot, and it's rushing everywhere, and it's sitting on a chair in the office for a whole day, and then my blood glucose levels are out of range, but that's the best I can do on that day. And none of the bad parts, and none of it's your fault. You're doing the best you can, and it is hard, and that's okay. Because it took me about, I think I was 3 years into my diagnosis, and I was talking to a medical psychologist, and you talk to Martje, and Martje's mentor is the one who back then I was interviewing at my job at JDRF. And he said, life with type 1 diabetes is harder because it is a lot of work and a lot of mental strain. And it's valid that you feel that your life is hard, because it's harder than for somebody who's not doing all that you're doing, and none of it's your fault.
I think sometimes even just hearing someone else say that, when you find it hard and you think, am I the only one? Is this just me? Am I just messing this up? Like, what is it with today? Et cetera, et cetera. I think just someone holding that mirror up and saying, yeah, this is really tough. I think it's so powerful. So that is what you've put out into the world. And I know beyond that you are making so many changes. I've had the privilege of, having touch points with you professionally and personally as well. And I just want to say thank you, because as I said right at the beginning, you are at the forefront of changing the future of many things around this condition. And I just want to say thank you for that. And thank you for talking to me on a personal level, because it's also rare that we get to do this.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for having me, because I mentioned this to you when you invited me, and I'm like, wait, what? I am hugely honored that you want me to come talk on here and have these conversations. And yeah, thank you.
The honor and the privilege is all mine. And yeah, you've shared such valuable insight. So thank you so much. And where can people find you if they want to say hello or connect with you?
Yeah. So I am on Instagram as Veerle0. And that's and if it's on a more professional level, or if you want to talk about working in this space or anything, I'm also on LinkedIn with my very difficult to pronounce name, which is Veerle Huigen. But yeah, Instagram is probably the easiest way to find me.
Yep, I'll put that in the episode description. And also you can find March's episode, which really, thank you very kindly, made the connection so that I could speak to an incredible psychologist who specializes in psychology around diabetes. And that was an absolutely incredible episode. So I'll pop that below in the episode description as well. And Renza, who I recently had on, who has such a wealth of knowledge around working in this space across the whole world in terms of being drilled into what the challenges are for people who live very, very, very different lives, and kind of how she is trying to make the playing field more even for everyone who has to go through this. And I think that's a really valuable episode and worth listening to as well. So if I can point people in those directions, that would be great. But Veerle, thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Type 1 Please remember that nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as medical advice. I'm definitely not a healthcare professional. If you like what you hear, hit subscribe and do leave a little review on iTunes if you have time. It really helps to spread the word about type 1 diabetes. And thank you so much for listening.